The fall of the American empire is not coming. It is happening, right now, before your very eyes. And those who have eyes to see and ears to hear must recognize the truth, no matter how bitter it may be. Get ready to listen to Dr. Joy DeGruy as she speaks.
I want to move on and explain the difference in my experience in Southern Africa to start the preliminary discussion around race and how that race issue in America, and a lot of people I meet from different countries do, they'll say, I don't understand what's wrong with you people in America. You seem to have so many problems with race. We don't have those problems in our country. And I say, of course not. Ain't nobody there but you. But America is a divine experiment, if you will. It is a divine experiment, and if this thing gets right here, it'll get right everywhere. So this is a divine experiment. I want you to know that, as tough as it is, it's something worthy for us to look at. And so as I began to look at my experience in Southern Africa, I tell people often that, first of all, my husband didn't want me to go, right? We had to deal with that because, he takes and protects the family, and this didn't sound right for me to be going to South Africa. And once that was okay with him, I have to admit, I'm from South Central, and I think that deserves an applause. And while, I am Dr. Leary and Professor Leary at the university, I can become South Central. I will go there on occasion. So, I'm figuring I got to, have a little bit of a, just a little bit of a attitude when I get to South Africa. After all this new stuff, new president. So I had an attitude, had a little chip on the shoulder. I was ready for something to jump off. I was okay for that. So, and if you want to kind of get a picture of it, it's like when you've had a little run-in with somebody, say at work, on Friday. Maybe you always, just a little exchange in the copy room, just some words, a little flare-up. You know what I'm talking about, and it's Friday. You know how you prepare for Monday, right? You say, well, if they say this is what I'm going to say. And if they go there, oh, hey, so you're all prepared, you're geared up. You can't wait. You can't even sleep during the weekend. You're so geared up for Monday. So Monday happens, you get in the office, your heart is beating. They're walking up on you, you're all ready, and they go, I'm really sorry about Friday. And you're thinking, I'm going to kick the cat or something. I got to do something with this. Well, this is what happened when I got to Southern Africa. When I got there, I was, had the chip ready. And after about a week or so and nothing happening, nothing at all, I started to provoke people. I said, you can't go all the way to South Africa on the heels of Mandela and all that and not have an experience. So I was going to have myself an experience. So I would go up to white South Africans and I said, tell me a little bit about apartheid and new president. That must be something, huh? And they go, yeah. As a matter of fact, Joy, it's been awful. The oppression of the blacks, the behavior of the whites. Glad it's over, though. Welcome to the new South Africa. And after about a half dozen people did, I said, I'm going to go to black South Africa. I'm going to ask the black South Africa. I'm going to have me an experience. So I go to black South. Tell me a little bit about, apartheid, new Mandela. Tell me a little, that must be something. They said, yeah, Joy. Oppression of the blacks, behavior of the whites. Glad it's over, though. Welcome to the new South Africa. And I'm thinking, isn't anybody upset? Come on now. We got our folks over in Idaho. That's close to where I live. They act up over there. We got them. But I was in palaces. I was in villages. I was all over. 3 or 4 different countries in Southern Africa. And I did not feel the level of animosity that entire trip that measured the level I felt in the Portland airport. So as a social scientist, I have to ask myself, what is going on with this phenomenon? And what is going on is that Southern Africa, South Africa, the country of South Africa, owned it. They couldn't help but own it. They showed out and the whole world looked at them and said, shame on you, South Africa. And South Africa said, yeah, we did it. We're so sorry about it. Please come back and bring your money. America's pathology is her denial. It is what keeps us sick about this issue of race. It is our denial. Now, the denial it's not just something, it's not a word, because I started to collect data. I have a tendency to do that. I wanted to look at what are the symptomologies. What's the symptomology of the denial? What does it look like? Let me give you some pictures of it. There are two groups of people in my experience. I have one of my granddaughter out there. Small children tend to tell the truth. And old people tend to tell the truth. I want you to stay with me there, okay? Now, when people say to me, which is often couched in the form of a compliment, Joy, I've grown and advanced so much as a human being. I've evolved clearly beyond you. I don't even notice race. And they'll say that right to you, like, lucky for you, I don't even notice race. And I want to bring that into some context. Like I said, there are two groups of people, small children and old people, that will tell you the truth. Now, anybody that has a small child or, family member, you're praying to God they don't get in a room like this before you do, aren't you? Because they're going to walk up on somebody and tell the truth. And you don't know what that truth is going to be. They might walk up to someone and go, God, you got a booger in your nose. That's what you got. And then old people don't care what you think. They say, your problem is you're stupid. That's your problem. Don't care what you think, that's it. Now, I want you to imagine, how many people know what a towhead is? I checked with white people on the term. Because a towhead. Now, let me give you an example. I didn't know what a towhead was. I was in South Central, and these two older white ladies were referring to this white child and said, oh, look at the towhead. And I'm thinking, them's fighting words. This getting ready to go down. Nobody got mad. I'm going, okay. And a towhead kid, now when I describe this child, you'll know what I'm talking about because you've seen them. And you almost probably remember the first time you've seen them. The whole kid is blonde. And it's that white, soft blonde everybody trying to get. But it's a phenomenal looking person. They like a wisp, but they're going to wisp away. And tow is also the term used for people who weave linens, and the small little fragments that fall to the floor is called the toe because it's white and it's soft. Okay, so you got that picture now, towhead. I want you to know there's a towhead. Imagine the towhead kid here, right, standing next to me. Next to the towhead child, we're going to put a Nigerian child. And next to that child, we're going to put a Japanese child. You think you're going to notice. Of course you're going to notice the difference. These are God's choice of colors. And to me, it's insulting, not only untrue, but insulting for you to say you don't notice race. I wake up every day black. I know it. I see myself, and you know what? It's absolutely okay for you to notice. It's not okay for you to erase me. The pathology associated with this statement is such that I'd rather erase you than acknowledge that you're there. And that's not okay. But it's also what we call cognitive dissonance. When people feel uncomfortable, it creates dissonance, and they do things to remove that dissonance. Here's another one. A person, I call this the fruit and festival approach, People say, we want to celebrate diversity. We gave you all a month, that sort of thing. Okay. Great. What are we going to do then? Let's celebrate. Let's get a diversity committee. How about that? Get Maria. Isn't she Mexican? Yeah, get her. And they get me. And let's get a little committee. And how about if we have a potluck? And let's have a theme. Let's have a cultural theme to that potluck. Let's have people bring cultural foods. And then, how about music? Let's have some cultural music, and maybe they can even dress up in cultural garb. And then everybody comes and checks off and leaves. And what you've now done is trivialize culture, have you not? You've said, well, this is all we built this country. Let's be clear. But what we're being told is, people of color, we bring your little festivals and stuff and your food, and you can dance and all that. And then we'll move about the real culture. You see, so that's called the fruit and festival approach to dealing with issues of race. Again, trivializing it. The other one is the person that, and you'll hear about these people do this. These are people that go, well, I really don't care what color you are. You can be purple, green, or blue. Well, guess what? We're not. They can't even use the real colors. And this is all associated with the discomfort or cognitive dissonance, if you will, associated with just dealing with this issue of race. So what I'm going to do is get up close and personal with this issue of race. I want us to talk about it. I want us to look at it. I want us to question it. But I want you to know that we didn't get here by ourselves. This is an old problem. A very old problem. It's so old, in fact, that it reaches very close to where we are right now. I'm going to go to Numbers 12. In the Bible, Numbers 12. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. And apparently they were a little upset about that. Well, it kindled the anger of the Lord. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And it goes on to say that God smite Miriam with leprosy, sent her out from the people for 7 days, and said that if her father had but spit in her face, she had to be ashamed at least 7 days. And then the people didn't journey into a whole long thing because she didn't like Moses' black wife. Now, I'm 46 years old. I have a lot of friends that are Jewish, and we have discussed lots of things, but for some reason, we never discussed Moses' black wife. We could be related. Now, they did try to get at it with a cartoon recently. A couple years ago, they had a cartoon on Moses, and I was pretty impressed because his wife was brown. Moses himself was brown in the beginning. He became fully white by the end of the cartoon, however. But it was at least the first attempt to deal with the truth. So I want to say that the problem is old. It is an old one. And whenever you're trying to prove something to someone, especially if you're trying, my family, we talk all at once. We're pretty intense people. You got to kind of jump in there. And whenever you're trying to really prove your point, there's a couple things that you say when people aren't buying it. You say, well, I read it somewhere. And that means it's in a book, which means it must be the truth. Okay, now when you fail to produce the book, you up the ante. And you say, well, it's a scientific fact. What I'm talking about is scientific fact. Now, here's what we understand about science. Science changes its mind every 5 years. Takes back everything it said, never says it was wrong, says we've had a paradigm shift. Now, and I also have to remind people that just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's, because the criminally insane can also write. So now let's go to those areas that we so often turn to for our proof. Let's go to science. And these are things that are very important because this actually comes out of a book. Okay. How many of you are familiar with Carl von Linnaeus? Carl von Linnaeus. I want you to remember this date, 1707 to 1778. This is when he lived. Carl von Linnaeus developed a taxonomic system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. Linnaeus properly began the science of anthropology. So Linnaeus is to anthropology what Freud is to psychology, the father of psychology. Now, a lot of people don't like Freud, particularly women. And those who don't have the issue with the things he said about women, know that he was on cocaine most of the time. But you cannot deal with psychology unless you go through Freud. So the same is true of Linnaeus. Folks don't like Linnaeus too much, but you can't avoid him. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists referred to Linnaeus' taxonomy of 1735 as the first modern study of man. While Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his 4 families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo Americanus. Who might that be? That would be the Native American or the Indian. Homo Americanus, he said they were reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by customs. Homo Europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus, as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo Afer, as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. But it's in a book. But more importantly, of all the groups mentioned, there was only one that had the most scathing assessment, and that was Homo affer. And now I'm going to tell you why that's so, because we know there's no science here. The reason why is because of that notion of cognitive dissonance. Now let me explain how that works. If I have a certain amount of information, knowledge, values, and beliefs that I hold true, and I am now faced with something in either my behavior or in my world that conflicts with that, it creates dissonance. Human beings work to remove dissonance. You cannot function with it. For example, if there is a child that I'm dealing with, and I've dealt with all of what they call the bad children, I want you to imagine a bad child. For 15 years, Johnny's been told he's bad. What does he believe that he is? He believes he's bad. And then the social worker types like myself show up and say to Johnny, "No, Johnny," because we've taken parent effectiveness training, "you're not bad. You're good." What does Johnny then do? He does something very bad. He breaks my windshield, cracks it, slashes my tires, and says, "There, I told you I'm bad." Now, see, I'm from South Central. I'm going to go with them on that. But if I'm a good social worker, I'm going to continue to say to Johnny that you are good until he maybe carves out a piece of himself that begins to believe good. But what happens when I tell Johnny he's good is it creates cognitive dissonance. And Johnny does something to remove the dissonance, to confirm for himself who he is. So understand, under any circumstances, human beings will work to remove the discomfort first. Now I want to go back to that date, 1707 to 1778. What was going on in America? American chattel slavery. So now I have to ask you this question. Do you think slave owners, slave masters, men or women, do you think they went to church? You think they sang hymns? You think they probably assisted in raising the funds for the choir robes and such? You think? Of course they did. Of course they did. And that might have been on Sunday. But on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they were raping 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old slave girls. So by the time they got to the pews, they had to be sitting there with immunity. You see, they had to feel, certainly it's not my fault, because after all, did it not say scientifically that they're lustful? Then they deserved what they got, didn't they? It's not my fault, so I can sit there absolved in the pews, because human beings cannot function with dissonance. So what we understand about individuals like Linnaeus is he paved the way to ease the conscience of the white Christian world. And so when we begin to look at this, we need to understand it with another lens. So he also had a contemporary person that another person that he dealt with. His name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Now, how many of you are familiar with the term or believe yourself to be Caucasian? It's okay. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, he lived 1752 to 1840, designated 5 races or varieties of man in the second edition of his treaty on the natural variety of mankind. His division into Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Ethiopian, and Malayan races with the added Linnaean descriptive peculiarities became the subsequent basis of most 19th century anthropomedical studies. While Linnaeus founded his system based on skin color, Blumenbach considered a combination of color, hair, skull, and facial characteristics as fundamental means for classifying the 5 varieties of man. Central to his study was the Caucasian, a term which he originated. Now listen for the science. He took the name Caucasian from Mount Caucasus because its southern slope had cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men, the Georgian. The Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark came to rest after the flood, seemed the appropriate source for the original race of man. Now I'm going to quote him. These are his words. For in the first place, the stock displays, as we have seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which is a mean and primeval type, the others diverge by most easy gradations on both sides to the two ultimate extremes. That is, on the one side, the Mongolian. You got folks walking around talking about being Caucasian, Mongolian, all that sort of thing. Now, I want to tell you something. I want to share something. I've never done this before, but I'm going to do it in this audience because I thought about it from the context of really experiencing a thing. And then I'm going to talk to you about the definitive, something a little bit more definitive. With the people in the audience that believe, now before you stand up, I want to tell you, make you clear about it, that believe that you are African American. I'm saying that. Now that means that you don't suffer any difficulty or ambiguity when you sign the little things, ask what your race is. Okay, and that means and I'm not mad at you, let's be clear. If there are people here that have a parent that's of another race, and they get up there and they're resentful because they say, I'm not this, I'm this and this. I want only the people to stand there to have no ambiguity about being African American. I want you to stand up. If you consider yourself to be African American, okay. Now, I want you to look around the room and you're going to find that people are of all hues. You got people with different facial features, different hair textures. Some of us got big butts and some of us wish we had a big butt, flat butts, all of that, different body type. We got all that going on. Now, those of you that are standing there believe yourself to be African American. If you know of somewhere in your family that there's some white blood, I'm not talking philosophically, you can find them. I want you to sit, please be seated. Those that know of certainty, a pretty significant amount of you. Okay, now, those African Americans that are still standing, now I always go to this group toward the end because everybody thinks they're Indian. Okay. The strangest thing about it is everybody got some Indian in them. I ain't mad at you, okay? I'm not mad. And the only people I know that can actually become, white people can become Indian. So they braid the hair, buy the turquoise, and they in. Because they've decided they're Indian. I've talked to Indian people about that, but that's another training. Okay, so those of you in this, really that know that you have some Indian blood of the African American standing, you got some Indian blood, go on and be seated. Now, of those African Americans that are standing, if you know for a fact you have some Hispanic or Latino blood in you, if you have some Asian or Pacific Islander blood in you, would you please be seated? Okay, can we now give an applause for the 2 or 3 or 4 of y'all that are African American? Now, we also had Africans in the room that just, came from the continent, I'm talking about the African American. Now, my point here, I got freckles. Something been going on here, okay? Let's be clear. So by virtue almost of being African American, it basically infers that you have mixture. Okay, it's mixed, all mixed up in there. And now let's get back to the one drop rule. Now, the problem is, here's the good news and bad news. All of you that are African American, those of you that got truly African American, those of you that realize you had other mixture, those of you that are biracial, what have you, in a racist society, you're all niggas. Thank you. Now, here comes the truth about race. And see, I do this as a preliminary because I've not begun the discussion, you see. Not really, because we have to get clear on a few things. We got to get clear. We aren't even clear about racism. So we got to get clear about stuff. And what we do understand, some of y'all thought, hair, skull, facial characteristics. Y'all went for that, some of you. I know you did. You're not going to admit it now, but I know you did. You thought, yeah, that makes sense. Now, I want to ask you, where do you find people geographically in the world, that have straight blonde hair? Where geographically? Specifically, Scandinavia. So in Scandinavia is where you find the folks with the straight blonde hair. We all know that. How do you explain Aboriginal children being born with straight blonde hair? How do you explain the subcutaneous fold in the eyes of the Bushmen of the Kalahari? How do you explain the broad lips of the Eskimo? You see, these things do not distinguish race. They do not. So let's read what DNA has told us now that we can look at it. Race is a concept of society that insists there is a genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcends outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classification. There are no significant genetic variations within a human species to justify the division of races. Mankind is one. That's the truth. That's what Martin knew. Martin knew intrinsically that mankind was one. And what we're going to talk about today is if, in fact, it is undeniable that we are one, that we are more alike than we are different. Matter of fact, there is more difference within a culture than outside of it. So, in fact, mankind is one. If we follow the one-drop rule in reverse, Martin Luther King would be Irish. And yet you laugh. But we bought the other one, didn't we? We bought it. Why did we buy it? We chuckle when we say if we use a one-drop rule that Martin would be Irish, but everybody gets to claim if they got a drop of black, do they not? So we got to get into the psychology of why that's so, which I think is greatly impacted by post-traumatic slave syndrome in terms of how we look at and identify ourselves, quote, racially, because it is a myth. It's not true. So now we've got to look at why then. Why then have we suffered so much around the proofs, the bell curve, Shockley, Jensen, phrenology, all of the things to prove a genetic inferiority? Aristotelian concepts of the natural slave, that you are de facto a slave by virtue of your skin color. You were born and intrinsically and inherently a slave, never to be on par with whites. What would prompt such a thing? This is what we have to understand in order to understand why we behave the way we do and what the nature of the injury is. So when I began to look, and I looked closely, I looked at the literature, and I looked at all the kinds of things that produce these notions socially in society. It's not a hard answer. It's not a hard answer because I believe everything in the dark is coming to the light. Everything is coming to the light. Sally Hemings, we all knew, didn't we? Come on, how long we knew? We always knew about Sally Hemings. And then folks got all twisted and upset when they said, oh, Lord Jefferson fathered, oh, Lord, slave black, oh, no. One of the four found, oh, what we gonna do? And then we had Strom Thurmond. It took 100 years to unravel that lie. But it was there. And I just want to know on record, anybody here know a white Washington? Do the math. Do the math. So this has never been a mystery to us. But there is fear. And the only way that love can triumph is in the absence of fear. Because you see, love cannot dwell in a heart possessed by fear. You got to cast that out because that's where faith lies. And so when we start looking at the fear that people have of the truth, because that's what we're talking about, the fear. And the interesting thing about it is Martin talked a lot about truth, light, truth, knowledge, love. He talked about that. And what we have to understand is when he said that there was power in light, he meant that literally. Because if we were to turn all the lights out in this sanctuary, if it was dark in this sanctuary, we turned off all the lights, and there was one candle standing in the doorway, that light would flow in, the darkness would not flow out. Because darkness is an absence of light. You see, and when we start looking at the absence of truth is where we get the fear and we get the ignorance. And so the way we deal with that is you replace it with the truth. And you replace it with courage. And that's what we have to do as we journey through our own healing. So now I begin the discussion of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Well, let's first understand what trauma is. Now, I know you all heard about trauma, and particularly you heard about post-traumatic stress disorder after 9/11. Now, I'm going to submit to you that we knew what trauma was before 9/11. And what people will say, because, I even have people on the radio show, because they say, yeah, but y'all free now. Why are you tripping? Get over it. You know what I'm saying? It's done. You're free. That's what people will tell you, right? And it's interesting, our response, because to me that's an easy response. They say, listen, Joy, I wasn't a slave owner. I didn't do it. I wasn't there. I'm tired of hearing about this. I'm tired of feeling guilty about it. And what I say to those folks is, you know what? I wasn't there either. I'm not a slave, far as I know. None of my cousins, friends, and associates are slaves. However, we have to understand that approximately 300 years of protracted slavery guaranteed that the progeny of the South, the white progeny, would have wealth and prosperity and privilege. And it guaranteed that the descendants of those stolen away would have debt, servitude, fear, and misery. So it doesn't matter if either of us were there. That is what it produced today. Be clear. And then they say, but Joy, I didn't do it. I marched in the civil rights movement. I said, so what you're saying is that you do not enjoy the rights and privileges of white people as this white person because when they come up and they tell you, there's another couple out there that want this loan, but they're black. I'm going to give it to you, okay? Just between you and me. You're going to say, no. I don't want that privilege. No. I don't want to. Oh, no, I know I could probably get a better deal, but don't give it to me. Do you enjoy that privilege? Do you not then also support and sustain the system? Because it's like you break my leg and get mad at me because I limp. So you yourself, but I didn't break your leg, Joy. I said, but did you support, sustain, vote in, and maintain the system that guaranteed your privilege, that created the pothole that I fell in that broke my leg? But y'all free. So let's look at trauma. What we understand about trauma, and there's a physiology of trauma. I'm not going to bother to get into that. But I'm going to talk a little bit about it so we can have a working knowledge of when people start talking about trauma, what they're speaking of. Now, trauma, people always say to me, well, Joy, there were happy slaves. Yeah, we're going to find them. I said, but that's okay. I'm going to give that to you because I'm sure there were some. We got some happy slaves now, don't we? So I know they had to be there. We got black overseers, don't we? Okay. And any of you want a point of reference, look at that, the movie Sankofa. So you can understand the notion of the injury to the black overseer. But when I look at this whole idea of trauma, you have to understand that, in fact, everyone's not traumatized by traumatic events. When those buildings fell, there were folks that weren't there, that heard about it, that saw it on the other side of the country that were traumatized. They can't get on an airplane now because they were traumatized. There were folks that were close enough to smell the bodies. They were traumatized. There were people whose loved ones were in that building who were traumatized. And there are people who escaped it, saw it fall down, narrowly escaped it, and weren't traumatized. So everyone is not traumatized by trauma. Okay, we all have what is known as a differential response to trauma, the traumatic event. But what we have to understand is what it produces. So the first thing I did in my research is I wanted to find out who exactly gets this, the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is a book called The Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Anybody know what that is? If you got insurance, you better figure out what that is. Because that's what they're trying to find a diagnosis to get paid. Okay. Let me tell you what this book said when they identified the groups of people that we accept. Victims of rape have post-traumatic stress disorder. War veterans, Holocaust victims, and their descendants, as a matter of fact. We have heart attack victims, victims of natural disaster, victims of severe accidents. And I kind of looked for a while. I said, they don't have slaves in there anywhere. So when I spoke to my professors, which is the reason why I don't want you to know that I'm obsessed with education. I have 2 master's degrees because when I was going for my master's degree in clinical psych, actually I was going to get a PhD. And when I started asking questions around this, it got a little warm. So I knew I wasn't going to get a dissertation out of them. So I had to get up out of there because I started asking some questions about why slaves weren't there, and they started giving me answers like, well, that was too long ago. This is a diagnosis that requires a certain period of time, maybe a few years or, some years, but that's just far too long ago for anyone. I said, okay, I'm with that. Well, let's read a little bit about what it looks like, this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. How do people behave? Marked diminished interest or participation in significant activities, feelings of detachment or estrangement from others, restricted range of affect, meaning the person is unable to have loving feelings, sense of foreshortened future, does not expect to have a career, marriage, children, or a normal lifespan. Difficulty falling or staying asleep, irritability or outbursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, hypervigilance, meaning watchfulness, attentiveness, wariness, mindfulness, alertness, and vigilance, exaggerated startle response. Now let me explain something. In order to get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which by the way is treatable by medication, it generally works. You don't have to have all those symptoms. You only need a few of them to get the diagnosis, okay? Just a few of those, the kind of things that, the symptomology. So now what we're going to do is become diagnosticians. We're going to go back and considering the fact that there were some percentage of happy slaves, we're going to let you have that number. I want to now look at perhaps the injured slave. Now I want you to tell me based on these conditions or these diagnostic features, whether you think a good percentage of the slaves might have had them. Not all of them, not the happy ones. Okay? Number 1, a serious threat or harm to one's life or physical integrity. Do the slaves get that one? Okay. Threat or harm to one's children, spouse, or close relatives. Sudden destruction of one's home or community. Seeing another person injured, killed as a result of accident or physical violence. Learning about a serious threat to a close friend or relative kidnapped, tortured, or killed. Stressors experienced with intense fear, terror, and helplessness. Disorder is considered to be more serious and will last longer when the stressor is of human design. That's 7 out of 7. You think some of them might have had it. Now, what I want to ask you now, because this is an important question, because y'all are afraid. Okay? Do you think or remember any time when we got that free therapy after slavery? Do you ever remember when they said, line on up, we're going to do a group thing or something with you? Do you remember that? Didn't happen, right? And then, of course, the response is, yes, but you're free now. Now, I want you to remember I told you about the person with hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, all that? That was Mama raising Johnny. Now, here's the question. Now, we're going to move from slavery into after slavery. But let's start looking at the nature of these traumas so we can get up close and personal. It gets a little gory here because I want you to know we got to tell the truth. And it amazes me how many people, when I start talking about what occurred during slavery, it amazes me how people want to leave out certain things. And the reason why I'm saying this is an interesting thing, because you notice how many children go missing and stuff like that? Or you know how many pedophiles show up all of a sudden? They the teacher, they the gym coach, they the all these folks. You know that's kind of happening a lot, right? And you know what? You know the Dahmers are showing up, Gacy, you know, cutting up the bodies, putting them under. You notice how all these folks kind of. You also know what they look like, right? Okay, but all right, just stay with me. Stay with me. Can you imagine those people who know socially this is deviant behavior? It does not meet with the norm, right? This is something that is taboo. But you see, during slavery, you didn't have to worry about that upsetting the social order, now did you? You didn't have to be questioned on your moral conduct because you could buy your pathology. You could buy it at 2. And you could do what you wanted with it for as long as you wanted to, anytime you wanted to, with absolute impunity. There was nothing to be done. You could buy what you wanted. And we don't want to think about that sick, maniacal person that bought it. But you know they did. You know they did. But we don't mention them. We talk about the happy master. They gave the happy slaves nice quarters and treated them kindly. That's what we talk about. And yet we see a pervasive number of those people that are doing that now. They did it then. But then some of you may say, well, I don't know. Is that written somewhere, Joy? So let's go to what is written. There are a couple of books if you want. You know, some of people, it's interesting how we get hung up on things. You know, people have questioned the Willie Lynch story. I don't care. You can question it if you like. Maybe throw it out if you want. Get 100 Years of Lynching, the book. And you get the newspaper accounts. It makes Willie Lynch look silly. Okay? And if you want the pictorial, you know, without sanctuary. It's not table reading, but if you want to see it, it's there. Okay, so we don't have to worry about whether the people want to substantiate it, because, you know, that's the first thing they do. And they find someone that's black, too, unsubstantiated, by the way. But let's look at what the law said. It is a book called Southern Slavery and the Law. And the one thing that's written about this is written by a man named, last name is Thomas, Southern Slavery and the Law. What's interesting about this is the opening chapter talks about the preoccupation with the black male penis size. You know how we keep talking about the myth and this and all that? Their whole first chapter devoted to the preoccupation with the male genitalia, which may explain why shortly after being lynched, they were castrated. But let's look at what the law says. And if any slave resists his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave and shall be happen to be killed in such correction, it shall not be accounted felony. But the master, owner, and every other such person so giving correction shall be acquit of all punishment and accusation for the same as if such accident had never happened. That's called the Casual Killing Act. That means if you happen to be beating your slave and you beat him to death, it couldn't be considered a felony. It was simply an accident while correcting the slave. And that sounds like painfully familiar to us around excessive use of force, right? And we start looking at the appropriate use of force and how many of us end up dead because that was the amount of force that they needed to correct. But let's look at this even closer. Why would you beat a slave to death? Well, you couldn't fine them because they had no money. You didn't want them to get jailed because then their labor is you. So you must beat them severely in order for them to submit. The slave, and inherent in the process was violence, you see. And they say, we're violent. But who pushed whom first? So let's look at another aspect. Those of you that understand that everything we do, we tend to pathologize. So how many of you are familiar with J. Marion Sims? J. Marion Sims. How many women in the audience know what a vaginal speculum is? Okay. So I bet you the women, brothers, that we lost you on that. It's an instrument that is used to peer into the vagina. It was created by this J. Marion Sims. It was credited to this day as being the wealthiest physician to have ever lived, given that. So let's read about what he did. J. Marion Sims was a physician in the mid-1800s who was credited with the creation of the first vaginal speculum, which was made from a pewter spoon. Sims had built a makeshift hospital in his backyard where he conducted surgical experiments on African slave women. Sims reasoned that slave women were able to bear great pain because their race made them more durable, and thus they were well suited for painful medical experimentation. Because you know, Thomas, we felt less pain, we didn't need sleep, and we didn't feel grief. That's really convenient, isn't it? So now we understand, well, how did they get these women? Where did these women come from that Sims got? So now let's go back and take a, well, they were to Sims, and the people would complain. Each one of these slave masters would bring these women in, and they'd say, this young woman here is not fit for duty. And Sims would look at these women, and indeed, they from something called a vaginal fistula. You might have heard about this. Oprah talked about it. The woman on there was talking about a vaginal fistula. And a vaginal fistula often occurs during childbearing when a woman will tear so deeply that it will tear through the urinary tract and the bladder. And in fact, you will see feces and urine that will drip through uncontrollably. It does heal, but it smells and it's very uncomfortable, and it's really a horrible state, largely due to the smelliness of it. But if you are in fact one of those women that have a vaginal fistula, can you still work the fields? You can work the fields. You'll be smelly, maybe uncomfortable, but you can work the fields. Can you sweep and clean in the house? Can you feed the animals? Well, then what makes her, J. Marion Sims, unfit for duty? I need to have sexual acts with her. So you need to fit so that I can do her, because that is her duty to me. Okay, so this is why they came to J. Marion Sims, and let's take a look at why they thought this was all okay. And it has to do with pathologizing race. You see, because by pathologizing, making race a sick thing, then you therefore justify your behavior to remove the cognitive. Yes, you're listening. That's right. You got to remove that dissonance. So now, their first pathological symptom was their primary racial characteristic, their skin color. In a medical world that categorized life as either normal, which is dichotomous thinking, people of the African diaspora were continually condemned to the category of pathological, their abnormal skin color serving as a foil for normal white skin. Pathological causes for this condition were concocted in order to explain its prevalence. But how come there's so many of these black people if it's a pathological thing? Here is what the favorite theory that arose out of the scientific medical journals. These people, the skin color and attendant physiognomy of the black, are the result of congenital leprosy. They decided that's what's wrong. If you're black out there, you got congenital leprosy. That's why you're black. Such medical arguments in collusion with racist and stereotypic scientific and cultural explanations grounds for differential treatment. Now, second pathological symptom. The second symptom was gender. Black females who were perceived to be irreligious, lustful, and immoderate. Well, my God, that is really convenient. Here is the proof. They're putting buttocks and genitals were offered as physical evidence of their pathology. Anybody with a big butt? Then it gets a little deeper. This one where I just really I couldn't believe this one. And some people have heard about this particular symptom. Daniel Cartwright argued, this was a 19th century physician, that two particular forms of mental illness caused by disorders were prevalent among slaves. One was drapetomania, which was diagnosable by one single symptom: the uncontrollable urge to escape from slavery. They pathologized not wanting to be a slave. Pathologizing. Then there was a second one, dysesthesia aethiopica, which was many symptoms: destroying property on the plantation, being disobedient, and talking. What I'm saying here is that you have to pathologize. Journals have been written about this, all to justify the behavior of what they did to remove the dissonance. So more seriously, when we look at the nature of the injury, y'all are all free. But I want you to take a look at what happened and what I mean by transgenerational impact. Transgenerational. Along a continuum. Generational trauma. If you are a slave mother and you are a good, we're going to prepare your children for adulthood, yes? Yes. There had been something called rites of passage, which is movement from your childhood into adult, meaningful work in support of the clan. Rites of passage. We have now adopted the term adolescence, which is a U-term, by the way. It was developed in Europe, which now gives young people permission to lose their minds. We just say, oh yeah, they're adolescent. Not in my house. I guess they just didn't get to be adolescent in my house. He did then began to give them permission to be insane during that period. But before that, we had rites of passage. And if I'm a slave mother and I'm a good mother, I am going to prepare my daughter to be raped. Come on now, I'm not going to let my little girl walk into that mind, am I? Not as a good mother. I wouldn't do that to her. So I'm going to say, baby, and I'm not going to wait till she's 18, assuming it's going to start. I got to pull her out at 8, 9, and 10 and say, baby, here is what happened to you. Here is what may or may not do to you, and this is what you might want to make it hurt less, and baby, don't scream. They make it worse for you. And baby, they come, and I don't know if it's one or two or a group of them, and I don't know how many times, but surely they're, baby, this is what they will do. If I'm a good mother, I will prepare my daughter for pathology. And when that night comes to wrestle her away, her father stands next to me, helpless, as she begs him to help her. But y'all are free. And what we have to understand is the nature of that injury. What it did to emulate the father, to prepare her daughter for something she could not humanly think was made for her. And then she had her own traumas. And remember, mama hypervigilant. And daddy has got outbursts of violence because he never got a chance to heal from his injuries. So then they said, but y'all were free. So now the second question is, after American chattel slavery officially ended, trauma stopped. So not only you're not getting healing from the original trauma, the traumas continued. Yes, I don't want to make it up. Am I telling the truth? Okay, well, let me go back to history in case folks, do you know who Emmett Till was that during slavery? It was not, but let's go back and look at what happened directly after slavery, because directly after slavery officially ended, meaning someone crossed the T and dotted the I, do you think they stopped enslaving us? No. So you had something called peonage. You can do the research. Peonage means the unlawful selling of slaves back into slavery. So there was a fair number that said, I don't care what you say, I'm going to keep my slaves. And then when they got broken down and caught, they moved to the next level. They said, well, you know, we can't re-enslave. You know, but we're going to develop some codes. We're going to make it so there is nowhere for them to go. So that means that if you enter this city and unless you work for a white person and they've signed off, you better not be here. You have no place to be unless someone white is being taken care of by you. And then they said, well, we can't do that anymore. Lord, can we? So that's when we created something called convict lease. If you want to know where the original overpopulation of black people in the criminal justice system began, it began with the convict lease laws. So now they're saying, well, can't we lease them? Well, in order to lease them, they got to be in jail, don't they? So now we figure out how to get them in mass in jail. Did you look at a white woman? No, get 100 years of lynching so you can understand the kinds of things they were arrested for. So now we have all of these chain gangs, and 25% of them died while under convict lease because there was no protection for them. But y'all are free. And then we had the civil rights movement, right? And prior to that, you know, when we started the whole notion of how to live, you had sharecropping, right? But they didn't really share, did they? So when we started looking at that, you became, it's basically indentured servitude, only worse. And then we said, well, separate but equal. And truth be told, during separate but equal, that's when, the Klan arose and Reconstruction, all those things began to happen. You look at that whole notion of what happened to us, the promise of freedom. And during segregation, actually, we were doing quite well. You know why? Because we had to depend on one another. We had to get beyond the lack of trust we had because we were all we had. And so, I went to. And you were the school I brought my children to. And you were the hairdresser. That's who you were for me. You were my community. You were my tribe. We economically blossomed. Tulsa, Black Wall Street. And what they did was they leveled us. And I know that people had a ribbon on because they said the worst disaster on American soil, the act of violence, was the Oklahoma 171 people. We had a moment of silence for them. Who tied a ribbon on for the 300 that died in Tulsa? How come we didn't know that? They didn't count as human, or they were trying to run from the dissonance. So what we have to understand is, how long then have we been free? 38, 39 years? But y'all are free. You see, but Joy, that was a long time ago. Surely you don't think that we now possess the behaviors or any. Well, let's take a look at that and share with you some of those behaviors, because it's called adaptation. It's learning to adapt to living in a hostile environment. We have normalized. We in this room have normalized our injury to such a degree that, and of course, white people have a disincentive for us to look, because then they got a mirror. And so let's take a look at what it might look like up close and personal with you and I. Because, we learn from the generation that precedes us. One of the things that I learned to do is I learned to cook at my mother's side. You know how we were talking about that the other night. We had the blessing of being in the home of Brenda Ross and her husband John, and they cooked a real meal. They laid it out for us, and she was talking about how she made those apple dumplings, and her daughter goes, "Well, did you write the recipe down?" She said, "Ain't no recipe." And knows, because you learn that way. Well, my mother would, go out, and I would learn to cook. My mother, I'd go out and I'd go grocery shopping, and I noticed that whenever my mother came to the point where she was going to buy tomatoes, she'd only buy 4. I don't know, just 4 tomatoes. To this day, I can't get a 5th one in the bag. Can't do it. I've tried, can't do it. You just simply don't need more than 4. My husband, I said, Ray, could you go still get some tomatoes? He came back, a whole bag of tomatoes. I go, "That's a whole lot of tomatoes you brought back." He said, "Well, didn't you say we needed tomatoes?" I said, "Yeah, but we don't need that many." He said, "Well, how many we need?" I said, "About 4." We need about 4? Now, that's innocuous. That's not going to hurt anybody whether I buy, 4 tomatoes or not. But there are other things that we've adapted to they're not innocuous. When we began, I had a woman say to me, and it really crushed me. Actually, it was a young man that talked about his mother. And it was a camp, a basketball camp. And I was working with black male athletes. I was talking about responsibility, relationship, and sexuality. And when I was talking to this one young brother, he said to me, and let me just kind of describe him. This brother is coal black, smooth, blemish-free, hope to die, drop dead. Beautiful brother. And he said to me, "Well, my mama told me, don't you ever bring home nothing black as you." That's what she had said to him. And when he looked at me and saw the horror in my eyes, he said, "Oh, but I could bring home someone like you." And I said, "Brother, you've not complimented me there, but I can understand his hurt from his mother who looked like him and what he reminded her of." So I began to look at that, and I started to look at the behaviors that were exhibited by African Americans that are part of what I call post-traumatic slave syndrome, and that's one of them. Of course, our skin color and hair texture and that foolishness, which is coming out in the hip-hop rap, so it ain't gone nowhere. Okay, so let's be clear, we are sticking with that. Hence the term natural. I had people say to me, "You're going natural, huh?" As if I was doing something odd. actually had a white person respond to that. And so my wife goes through the same thing. You know, she wears her gray. I go, he don't get it. Now, I'm not talking about wearing your gray. I'm talking about wearing your hair, stay with me, the way it grow out your hair. We have now created a whole new industry on how to care for the hair that grow out your head. Because we don't know how to do it anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, because I think black people are some of the most versatile and beautiful. Well, we can dye it, shave it, lock it, perm it, braid it, roll it, do whatever we want with it. I ain't mad at you. But please don't have a problem with how it grow out your head. And evidence of that is the natural hair products that are coming. Oh, and you know, white people are selling it to us. About to figure out how they can now market, because they marketed how you couldn't deal with the way the hair grew out your head, and that to you, and now they're selling to you how to take care of your hair that grows out your head. And then we look at each other as though we're making a statement because we wear our hair the way it grows heads. There's something wrong with that. That's post-traumatic slave syndrome. Okay, so now let's move to something a little more intense and more serious. When I was in Southern Africa, what I marveled at was the children. I marveled because these children were so tall. Dirt poor, tall, taller than anybody in America I had met, because they were clear about who they were. They were clear. They may not be clear about some other things, but they were clear about being black and being all right with that. And I could see it. I could feel it with them. And one of the things that I noticed that happened to me is when I got to South Africa, I cried. I wept constantly. I would weep because I was so moved by what I had lost, I thought. Now, in Southern Africa, you know, in different parts of Africa, like you have people who dance and sing. Folks sing in Southern Africa. And they really sing. And sing when you cry. Like when you cry, nobody goes and runs and gets a tissue. They just silent, 4-part harmony. They start singing, right? And this was so, it was overwhelming. I was there, like, again, with 8 other African-American women, and we were overjoyed at this melodious response to my tears until they would all stop and then turn to us and say, all songs to us. Now, contrary to popular opinion, we can't all sing. And y'all know that because y'all got the Apollo. And we know what we do with folks that can't sing. Okay? So the women would look over at me because they wasn't interested in singing. Now, we did end up with some pretty nice, luckily there were a few women that could sing, and we ended up on the radio, if you want to know the truth. We really got into singing. But got a little upset with me. And so they met me when we were on our way to Lesotho. And they got up and they met without me, and when I woke up, they said, Joy, we've met, and we've talked, and you know, as you know, today we are going to Lesotho. And Joy, we're not singing when we get to Lesotho. So whatever to do with yourself, to get yourself together so that you don't cry, you need to do that, okay? Because we are not singing in Lesotho. Okay. So I said, I'm good. I can handle this, I'm good. So we get to Lesotho, and they have invited people from all over, people from the villages. You have political figures, you have educators, you have all these important people, and you have village people, different languages, they all show up. And in Africa, you know how we are about greeting. Now, black greeting. You know, hey, how you doing? Hey, listen. When you're with white people, they go, gosh, you know so many people. I don't know them people, but I'm going to greet them. Because y'all know what happens when you don't greet, right? Try to walk past Aunt Dolores and not greet her. Try to do that and live. Okay? I don't care if you got to run to did you see Aunt Dolores? Have you lost, or then don't try to not notice folks. Oh, you too good? So we are serious. In Africa, they put a hold on greeting. Ceremonial to greet. And there's no such thing as sneaking in the back. Everybody is greeted no matter how or when. The meeting is over when nobody's late. Okay? So what happens is, I get up, and each one of us, my crew has already told me we're not singing. So each one of us gets up and we introduce ourselves. And as we introduce ourselves, the translator gets up. And this is interesting. His name is Gilbert. And Gilbert is the descendant of slaves that were enslaved in South Africa by the Dutch. So we have a similar experience, only he went back and learned all the tribal languages. He didn't just speak Afrikaans. So Gilbert gets up, and he starts, and I say, hello, my name is Joy. I'm traveling with a group of women and African-American women, and we are trying to develop a corridor with African women, and I just kind of sit on down. Gilbert says, thank you. He gets up, and he starts to translate. And then he goes on and on and on. And so my sister, who's in the group, and my niece, they're looking over at me like, I said, I know I didn't say all that, right? And he's going on, and after a while, the people are chanting. And they're so I'm like, okay, Gilbert, what'd you tell him, Gilbert? What'd you tell him? And Gilbert said, I told that. I said, Gilbert, I know I didn't say all that. He says, oh, okay, well, here's what happened. I was telling them, everything you said, and then when I said African American, to some of the village people, when I said that, they got confused, the folks, because they thought all Americans were white. So then I had to explain to them that you were the descendants of the ones that were stolen away. And they started to say, welcome home. Everybody was singing. Everybody. I was tore up. Tore up. Everybody hanging in the room. My sister's glaring at me like... So this woman is standing over in the corner. He looks over at me. She walks over, because everybody's singing, and I'm sitting there trying to suck it all back, and she grabs me by the hand and she said, did you think we would forget you? She says, I am from Lesotho. Lesotho is my home. If I leave Lesotho for 10 years, Lesotho is still my home. If I leave Lesotho for 50 years, Lesotho is still my home. She says, you are African 300 years from home. She said, we're so proud of you. Don't you know we mourned Martin with you? We mourned Malcolm with you. We just wondered coming back. I was tore up. But I had an experience in Southern Africa, an awakening, a pilgrim. And one of the things that I realized is how injured I was. Truly, my own injury. And the first thing I always do is look at the mirror. Trust me, a lot of this diagnosis I can tell by me and my family by themselves. But one of the things that I started to realize was people's judgment of us. And let me help you understand. I'm not one of those people that think Africa is nirvana, because that's not true. Africa is not nirvana. Africa needs us because Africa's problems are severe. HIV and AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa is destroying Africa. What is going on in Sierra Leone is unmentionable, what they are doing to children. And the rapes in South Africa are horrific. Let's be clear. Africa is not nirvana. But one of the things that I did recognize was how much they could embrace. And they would say things, in all these different languages, but all of it translated to a similar statement, and instead it would translate into, upon greeting me, was, I see you. I see you. That's going to be very important as I talk about my research. But I was touched by that notion of I see you. Acknowledging that you are important enough for me to connect with you. And even Einstein said that the myth of humanity is our perceived disconnection. We are living the lie of disconnection when we are connected. And what happened when I got is I was a bit depressed. I came back home to being marginalized and invisible. I came back home to a familiar hostility. And so I stayed in my home a bit, to such a degree that the women that traveled with me would call my sister and say, has she left the house yet? And I had not. So finally one day I had this experience which forces me out of my home. My young daughter runs in and she says, there's a boy outside. He says he's going to beat up Nadine. That's her brother and my son. And he says he's going to pee on the car too. This could happen in the hood. So I had to go outside. So I go outside and they're standing in the middle of everything is, these young brothers that are just kind of steady, looking tough. Nobody's over 10 years old. So I walk over to the ringleader and I say to him, excuse me, brother, has my son done something that I need to know about? He said, yeah, I want to know if you got some kind of eyeball problem. I said, what did you say? I said, I know Ebonics, I don't know what he said. I said, what did you say? He said, I want to know if he got an eyebrow problem. What he staring at? I said, wait a minute. I mean, you want to beat my son up and pee on a car because he was looking at you? Because my son was at you, you want to beat him into the ground? He could have been looking at you because he's got a little hoop outside. You know, we had a little basketball hoop. Maybe you want to play one-on-one. He could have been looking at you because maybe you want to go and play some little video games. You got a little Nintendo in there. Maybe he could have been looking at you because down the street is a park and y'all can go down the park and kick it. He could you for anything. Oh. I ain't got no little therapy there. But I'm giving them, the same lecture most of you give them. Listen, we got to live in this community. We got to live as a village. We can't hurt each other. We got to protect each other. The whole thing. And then it occurs to me when I go back inside, as I'm formulating what I'm going to look at. What is the research, Joy, that you want to look at? As I'm formulating that, I recognize one of the symptoms of post-traumatic slave syndrome. I recognize something called vacant esteem. Vacant. Look at that because I remember being in the villages with the door and the tattered clothes, and I remember, I see. And then I started to look at what happened when I got back to America. Because when I got back to America, African Americans were saying, what you looking at? What you looking at? I see you. What you looking at? Isn't that an interest? What had happened to this little 10-year-old boy that he could not withstand a gaze? What had happened in those fragile little group of years between birth and 10 that he would have so much rage about a glance? And then I began to realize what boy was so angry about. He wasn't angry at white people, you see. He was angry with my son. But why was he so angry with my son who looked at him? Because there's something we all know in this room. It's something that black people can do. We know our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our mothers and our fathers. We all somehow, another one of those things we normalize, which is supernatural in some ways. We can read people, can we not? We can read you. Not only can we read you, we can walk into a situation and go, whoa, it's feeling thick in here. My sister and I can walk into a supermarket and watch a situation and go, now you checked her out, right? Yeah, she came in, you see that man, you see that woman he with, that's his wife over there, right? Okay. Getting ready to get real up in there. Meanwhile, there's a white woman standing behind me going, did you see someone come in? There's a reason for that. I'll tell you the reason for that, because privilege allows her or him to not have to concern themselves with what's going on. That's not so with you and I. So I'm looking at this notion of what you're looking at. And I know, we represent a lot of different understandings, but I remember reading in some religious scripture something saying about black people. And in this statement, it says, the black man is like the pupil of the eye, surrounded by a sea of white. But it is the pupil which is the sight. It beholds what is before it. So what that little boy could reflected back at him is what he hated about himself. Because you see, our sense of esteem based on the significant appraisal of those closest to us. Because I am not who I think I am. And I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think that I am. So that little boy thought that my son thought of him as him, and he hated him for it. He hated him so much that he wanted to hurt him. He wanted to hurt him for revealing back to him what he hated most in himself. He didn't look at white people because they reflected back, but we do. That's why I don't like you. That's why I hate you, because you remind me of the nothing I am. That's why. And he's 10 years old. And it doesn't start at 10, it starts at 3. But this is part of what I call post-traumatic slave syndrome. Let's go up a little closer. Let's look at what we do. And it's very common. And it doesn't matter what class, doesn't matter what age, what education, it doesn't matter. You have white Johnny, black Johnny. You have a white mother, you have a black mother. They both have children. Both these children are in Little League. Both these children went to the same classes, the same schools, and played together. Earned the same marks in school. And so the black mother says to the white mother, commenting on her Johnny. You know your Johnny. That boy is really doing quite well. And she says, yes, he is. Matter of fact, he's quite the man. He is in the talented and gifted program, and as you know, he's doing quite well in the league. He's also in the science fair, and his project got #1. Now, his uncle is an astronaut, and I really believe the boy has a propensity. You got to cut her off. She is oozing with enthusiasm, and I'm not mad at her. She's proud of her Johnny. And then she, remembering, oh my goodness, what am I saying? This Johnny, knowing that this child has the same or even maybe greater qualities, and she says to the black mother, yes, but your Johnny, that boy is really coming along. And before she can finish, she goes, girl, shut up. You should have seen his little butt yesterday. I tried to kill him. Oh, he's a mess. Oh, girl, shut up. You do it a lot. But here's the bottom. She's proud, don't we? Even though she goes, girl, shut up. She's really proud, though, isn't she? And we all know it, don't we? But she can't, it almost is painful to hear the compliment. This is 4. Are you with me? Yeah. It's 2-3. And what we have to understand is Johnny is standing next to her. But let's roll it back so we can understand it in context. Let's roll back that little scenario, but let's roll it back to slavery. And now you have a slave mother. She's got 3 or 4 children. And the slave master walks through, male or female, doesn't matter. And they come by and they go, my, I see that Johnny of yours. Well, now he's really coming along. What is she going to say? No, he's not coming. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work. He unruly because she doesn't want him sold. That's called appropriate adaptation to our environment. That's post-traumatic slave syndrome. But y'all are free. Y'all are free. But what you have to appreciate is while Mama's sitting here, 2004, brimming over with pride, Johnny is standing there crushed. Mama, why can't you be proud? What do I have to do, Mama, for you to know that I can do things, that I'm worthy? Why can't you praise me like she praises her Johnny? Am I not good enough? Mama, Daddy, can't you see that I can do things? I just want so much to make you proud. That's 2004, and the scary thing about it is they're brimming with pride. And we're in Johnny in 2004. It's a secret we all know that it's become a pathology that we have normalized. Now, can someone white tell us that? You got black people that walk into rooms, another form of post-traumatic slave syndrome. They walk in and they're not black. You've met them. I mentioned it earlier. Did I say that I have a lot of Latino or Hispanic in me? I have quite a bit of Indian. Let me be anything but. And they come in, obviously, at least enough black that you can visually see it. And they say to the white person, no, I'm not black. This is the white therapist. They're going to say to the white therapist, but we gonna now help you with your problem with your wife? I gotta help you with your problem. But they can't touch that, can they? All they can do is pathologize it, but they certainly can't help. But I understand that part of us that doesn't want to be. The ones that, we move on out of the race. Sometimes we'll just make money on out of the race. We figure a way out of the race. Just like that young boy I told you whose mother said, don't you bring home nothing black as you? He promptly went out and got a Mexican girl pregnant. So what she would issue forth wouldn't be what he hated and what his mother hated. But that wasn't during slavery. So when we begin to look at behaviors that we exhibit, they're not innocuous. They're harmful. One more and then I'll move on. What time is it? I don't have a sense of that. Okay. I just want... That clock is right? Let's look at this one. Here's another one. And this is a very interesting thing. I teach a course called Human Behavior in the Social Environment. And I actually teach a lot about human development. Now, there's a physiology to human development. It's something I want you to know, which is really interesting. All black babies excel beyond developmentally any white babies. I'm not giving you myth here. You can look this up. Call an occupational, physical therapist, developmental therapist, any of them, they'll tell you that a black child, my grandson, recently went to his little well baby thing. My daughter called me while I've been here. Because, we kind of do that for each other. She's an MSW. She was in my program. And she said that when she got to the doctor's office, my grandson is 7 months old. And he said, doctor said, well, is he sitting up now? How is he doing sitting up? And my daughter said, he's pulling up and walking around furniture. Sitting up. And the woman stopped and said, well, actually, black babies are often 2 to 3 stages removed and beyond white babies, so he's probably right about where he should be. Right? It's not a myth. So it makes you wonder wherein, Joanna Conjufu says 4th grade failure syndrome. Obviously, we start off ahead. Father, where are the children in proximity of that black mother or father? Yeah, they're right next to him. Matter of fact, they're so close to him, sometimes they're holding on. The mama moved, daddy moved, everybody moved together. I actually was in line with a child, lost the mama's leg, was rubbing the leg, sucking the thumb. Mama moved, grabbed my leg, was sucking the thumb. Right? Didn't even notice, lockstep. Matter of fact, they're there, we expect them to be there, and if they should move to left, get yourself. You better get yourself. Get over there, right? Y'all know we all did. And I started to watch this phenomenon, and when I would ask, I literally would ask these mothers, how come the child, is right there? That's where I was. When I was with my mama, that's where you was. Don't need to be wandering about. But in the same bank, there's a white woman or a white man, and they got their little 3, 4. Johnny, honey. No, come on. Johnny, slide down the aisle. Coming up to people, what's your name? That's a pretty sweater. They're all up in your face, floating all around. I'm sorry. Don't put that down. Oh, I'm sorry. Child all over the place. Right? Same bank. It's exact same bank. So now I'm looking at this behavior because what this is called, when a child feels safe, they explore. It is how the brain develops. It's part of brain development to explore. It is one of the tasks of development to feel enough security and safety about your environment. A very important developmental stage. So now, you see, this is a nonverbal thing. So the little children can't move, but they're looking and they're learning. They're going, okay, but it's okay for him. And it's okay for her. But it's not okay for us. I can feel my mama and my daddy's fear. And now I'm afraid. I'm afraid because I'll get in trouble if I do that. Are you following me? But then children are pretty resilient. They're pretty tough. So the mother or the father gets to the teller. Now they're all trying to escape because they're trying to fulfill their developmental task. So they're now underneath the little counter, which is a little higher than them, so they're underneath the counter. Mom or dad are facing the counter, and they're sliding down. They get ready, they think, oh, we're free. We're free. We're going to escape because we're going to slide out and we're going to go play. But in the line is another black mother or father. They don't know this mother, and they don't know her children. But they do know the death stare. And any black person worth their salt know the death stare. So a little kid goes, oh, wow. Not a word is exchanged. And so what we have to understand about post-traumatic slave syndrome, that it's transmitted on several levels. On the level of the individual, on the level of the family, and on the level of the community, as well as society. So this was a community-based transmission, you see. We keep the checks and balances even beyond our individual family dynamic into the community dynamic, and there is never a word exchanged. Yet Johnny is learning, 2004, that it's not safe for them to explore. We're teaching our children to be fearful. We're teaching them that they're not effective, that they're not good enough, that they're not capable, that they're not welcome. But we didn't mean to, because y'all all free, aren't you? But I'm trying to illustrate for you how it gets transmitted. And those are pretty innocuous. There's some other things that aren't so innocuous. In terms of how we have learned as women to protect ourselves, right? Because we're all living in a hostile world. So I'm going to go right now to my research, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I looked at. I looked at 200 African-American male youth, 100 of whom were actually incarcerated, and that becomes a major issue. That another form of slavery, because you better know they're going to fill all those beds that they've bought. And we are the fodder for those beds. So I worked with 100 that were incarcerated, 100 that were not. So 200 in all. So now I'm to empirically measure injury. I want to measure, I want to be able to create predictability as it relates to violence. I wanted to look at vacant esteem, and now you have a sense of what vacant esteem is. Vacant esteem is also what the whole notion of don't you bring home nothing, black is you, good hair, bad hair, all of that falls in the category of vacant esteem. And so part of what I wanted to look at was that notion of self and self-efficacy. But my committee said that's not a social problem. They said that's not a social problem, but you can look at violence. We consider that a social problem. We don't care how y'all feel. We just want you to not bother us. So I looked at violence. And one of the things I wanted to do in this study was look at how do we predict violence in African-American male youth. So what I did was I looked at 5 variables, 5 scales or measurements, 5 surveys, if you will. Right? And the 5 surveys, we're going to ask the question, what is the relationship to this variable and the use of violence? So that's the dependent variable. What I want to find out is use of violence. So the first 2 variables that I use, you are familiar with. It's all through the literature. You've read about it and heard about it, and it's specials all on television and everything. And that is violence victimization. We know that if there is victimization, there's likelihood that that person is going to grow up to be what? Violent, because they've been victimized. So that's called a baseline variable, something we know. Then we have violence witnessing. We also know that the more witnessing you have of violence, the more likelihood you're going to have violence. So those are 2 baselines. The next 3 were cultural or socio-cultural variables. These were the variables I wanted to connect with culture, with history, and with injury. So the first variable that comes out is a variable called urban hassles. My hypothesis was the more urban hassles, the more violence. And I surveyed all 200 of these young men to find out, well, what is an urban hassle? Do you hear sirens at night? Do you hear gunshots? Do people approach you trying to sell you drugs? Do you try to find a safer route home from school sometimes? Are you fearful of the safety of yourself or your family? Those are called urban hassles. And I said the more of them, the more violence. Now, we understand what created the urban setting, right? You understand that that was something deliberate. Urban ghettos and all that sort of thing. It's deliberate. And within those are the urban hassles that go along with it. Yet unmeasured for us, because we've normalized it, right? Do you see what I'm saying? This becomes normal behavior. We've normalized the stressors associated with being black. I want the day to come when they put electrodes on a brother when a police car rides up behind him. Because, you know, when a police car rides up behind my husband, I know that that police car is there without my husband ever saying a word. His entire body language changes. We haven't done anything wrong, yet there is a hypersensitivity. There's a look in the rear view. There's a checking to make certain everybody's in their seatbelt. This is 2004. Nobody's measured the electrodes that go into the stressors associated with being black. Okay, that's when we don't measure. You know, there's a stress scale where they measure, you know, if you get married, you get divorced, if you move, if you know, somebody dies, somebody born. How about if you're black? There's a stressor associated with being black. Nobody's ever measured that. Okay, so now when you begin to look at this urban hassle, I said it predicted. Now here's the next one. Now this variable is an important one. It's called racial socialization. All this, it can be found in a published dissertation, but the racial socialization scale, both of these scales, by the way, written by black people, this racial socialization scale is actually a protective factor. We're saying that this is going to build resilience. Now, what is racial socialization? Racial socialization implies and suggests that we should prepare our children that they may be in a hostile environment. But even if they enter that hostile environment, they're going to be okay. And the reason they're going to be okay is because they got a God. And the reason why they're going to be okay is because they have a rich, strong culture. And if for some reason mama can't help you, grandma, auntie, or uncle can. They learn that you are not the descendant of slaves, but you are the descendant of captured free men. You learn that you have self-efficacy in and of yourself, that you have intrinsic value, power all by yourself. And I suggested that the more racial socialization, the less violence. Now the force, or the variable, that I looked at, I searched for, I waited for, because this was going to be the linchpin, and I knew it. And they kept telling me about this scale and mom and daddy scale and who in the house scale and socioeconomic. And I said, no, that's not what this scale's got to be about. But it's interesting how things come to you, because I knew that it would have to come from these young men. And so I would meet with them and kept hearing this over and over again. Well, you know, they diss me. You know, that's what happens when you diss a brother. Well, the reason why that brother went down like that is because he was dissed. Meaning what? Disrespected. And I heard it, both groups, all 200. It would happen so much. I said, okay, I've got to look at the relationship of respect to violence. So I immediately went back to my committee and I said, I need to find a respect scale. And I searched the literature and there wasn't one. And so my committee said, oh, it seems you have a problem. I said, but I must write one then. Well, they say, I'm not one of those people that create scales. I have no skill in that. It's never been tested. It's never been measured. It's never been, none of that. But they couldn't argue because one didn't exist. So I wrote the scale, and they didn't know if it was going to perform, meaning that it was valid. They didn't know it had face validity, but they weren't certain. But I looked at respect in these categories: respect among peers, respect among institutions, and respect among authority and society. I wanted to know what these young men felt about, and my hypothesis was the degree to which they felt respected, they would have less violence, and the degree to which they felt disrespected, conversely, would produce violence. So I did a linear regression analysis, meaning I took all of those variables and I looked at them as it related to significant prediction of use of violence. And all of the hypothesis was correct. Well, great. That was wonderful. Now we know that more patient and witnessing produces violence, more urban hassles produces violence, more racial socialization decreases violence, less respect, more violence, more respect, less violence. So it became very clear, great. But then I wanted to know from these young men, two open-ended questions. So now we're not looking at a scale. I'm letting them write it out themselves, all 200 of them. If for some reason you or your friends have been disrespected, why do you think it happened? And why do you think people like you might be disrespected? I asked them this in 2000. I wanted to know, what do you think about that? And so they gave me answers. But before they gave me answers, I did a stepwise multiple regression analysis. And I wanted to look at what are the very strongest predictors of violence in this study, Joy. Of all the variables, what are the strongest? And what fell out first was victimization and witnessing, baseline variables we already knew, and respect. Strongest predictor of violence. I'm going, oh my God. And what is the criminal justice system based on? What is its motto? It's punitive. I'm going to take you. So in effect, it is a wrong approach to rehabilitation because you are creating a criminal. Because the more you disrespect him and crush him, the more violent he will become. So now I go back to why, though, do you think in 2001, and let me help you understand who the other 100 young men were, the ones that were not incarcerated. They were in a Gentleman's Rites of Passage program, Afrocentric program called Bridge Builders, where they went into Passage at 14 and they graduated from Passage after completing 1 year of college. They were going to Stanford, they were going to Harvard, they were going to black colleges, they were going all over the country. Same kids, same zip code area. Only difference was they went through this program of Passage. So surely they would have a different perspective on this. Surely they would be different in their belief system around why they were disrespected. And guess what they said? The large majority of them said, it is because I am black. I am a black man living in a white man's world, because historically we have never been respected. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, you will always be black. So how long do our black men think they're going to be disrespected? And you know they're mad about it. They're mad about it. So it became very, very clear that this wasn't any isolated incident. They knew why they were disrespected. And they knew that it was perpetual. And what does it look like? What kind of future do you have when you know you are always going to be marginalized? No matter what degree you get, no matter how much money you have. Like Stevie said, you can't, trade in your face. You can't. And one of the things that I started to realize, I said, my God, that wasn't the deep about this research, because it became very clear. Now all of the prisons, everybody's calling you, writing, because now they know it's out. I need to replicate the study. We need more research. It's not enough research. I need to look at women and girls and our relationship between men and women. I need to look at all of that. And I can't do it all. But now the cat's out. Now we know. And we know creating criminals, and you're doing it deliberately. We know it. They're not functional outside of prisons now. They're not functional. They're learning dysfunction and deviance. It's designed that way. And it is counterindicated for them to be treated with a punitive model. Clearly, it's wrong. But what was more important to me, what was far more important to me, was what I learned respect meant. That is what, to me, was the crucible in this research. Something it's called unexpected results. By the way, I discovered that they always talk about the absence of father and what it produces in young, delinquent males. My research suggested that it was the absence of mother, not the absence of father. Now, you've heard a lot of stuff, but the absence of mother, whether she was physically there or not, present, or whether she was not there, it produced more violence than the absence of father. So we need to start taking a look at that. But aside from that, here's what I realized. Can anybody out there tell me what respect means? I mean, because I asked white people what respect means. And white people, particularly white men, it was very interesting, their response. And their response was thoughtful. And they said, I think for me, respect means an earned regard. Earned regard. I asked black men and women what respect means to them. They say a sense of value and worth. Respect. To be treated with a sense of dignity, value, and worth. I asked my husband when my grandson was born, I said, does Nasir have worth? And he says, of course he has worth. I said, what is his worth? He said, hope. He is the proof. He is a continuation. He is a future. He has intrinsic worth. But what was interesting is that respect doesn't mean that. Respect doesn't either of those things. Respect, taken from the Latin, literally means look again. Respect, look again. What did they say to me in Africa? I see you. Look again. Don't look the first time. Don't trust what you see the first time. Give me a chance and look again, because then you'll see what's in you is in me. Look again. So not only must they look again, we must look again. We must respect. It is simple, and it took me all the way back to we've got to respect who we are. We cannot do that if we don't who we are. We cannot correct what we don't understand. And we cannot apologize for having the courage to talk about what hurts us. We have never been given permission, nor have we given ourselves permission to talk about our injury. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is not something odd. Naeem Akbar talked about it. James P. Comer talked about it. Asa Hilliard talked about it. Wade Nobles talked about it. Your grandmama talked about it. Your grandfather talked about it. Your sister talks about it. We just put a name to it. But there are things that go off. We've got to stop injuring ourselves, and we have to start looking more closely at that injury, something we have never given ourselves permission to do. We have a Holocaust that we have never honored. And I'm telling you, when I say everything in the dark is coming to the light, I'm telling you, our ancestors unearthed themselves here in New York. They unearthed themselves. They said, you will have to honor me. There's no choice. Everything is getting uncovered. And it's not an easy thing. This is a painful process. Nor am I looking for the permission of white people to talk about it. I'm not. I'm not asking them to do so. Is to engage in post-traumatic slave syndrome. To do so, to say, Mr. Jimmy, you know, I'm cut over here. I'm cut over here. I want to show it to you. It hurts and I'm bleeding. Mr. Jimmy, does it hurt? And we will ask Mr. Jimmy, and if he says it doesn't, we go, well, if Mr. Jimmy said it don't hurt, it must not hurt. I'm not getting ready to ask anybody about my injury. I'm not getting ready to ask anyone to validate, accept, or approve of that. But I understand we need to look at this thing systematically and in the right way. In every way. We need our own truth and reconciliation. Are you with me? We need to be able to speak our injury. We need to be able to do that cathartic step. And then we need to move on to the next step, which is healing. Folks have asked me, what do I hope for? I hope for truth and reconciliation. I hope for our economic self-sufficiency. I hope for the stability of our families. I hope for the joy and happiness of our children. I hope that we will forever be contributors to an ever-advancing civilization, because we are the mothers and fathers of civilization. And so it is that time for us. So I want to close with a wonderful statement that I often read, because it is so powerful. I said to myself when my grandson was born, I had the opportunity to be at that birth. And I thought before my grandson was born that I could retire. And when I looked at him and I gazed into his eyes, all the rest of the world became ashes. Became ashes. And I said, I have to do it for him and for little Naya, my granddaughter. I have to do it for them. Because if we do it, it's going to get done. If we don't do it, it won't be done. And we will continue to be injured and to wonder what's wrong. We know what's wrong, friends. We have to begin to address it. Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes of Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors, Kasarian and Gera. One would always say to another, meaning, and how are the children? It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that they place on their children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own would always give the traditional answer, all the children are well. Yes, all the children are well. Meaning, of course, that peace and safety prevail, that the priorities of protecting the young, the powerless are in place, that Maasai society has not forgotten its reason for being, its proper functions and responsibility. All the children are well means that life is good. It means that the daily struggles of existence, even among a poor people, do not preclude their proper care for their young. I wonder how it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare if in our culture we took to greeting each other with this same daily question. And how are the children? I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, if it would begin to make a difference in the reality of how children are thought of or cared for in this country. I wonder if every adult among us, parent and non-parent alike, felt an equal weight for the daily care and protection of the children. I wonder if we could say without any hesitation, the children are well. Yes, all the children are well. Our children are not well. They are not. And I strongly believe that they can be healed. They can be prevented from carrying all of the baggage, all of the injuries that I have. the injuries that I carried that my mother had and my father had and your mother and father had. I believe that if we really stand together, if we exemplify the things we know to be true and real, the things that Dr. King gave his life for, I think we can be certain that we can say, all the children are well. Dear friends, let the healing begin. Thank you.
During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Black Americans built thriving economic institutions, including banks, insurance companies, and commercial hubs such as Tulsa's Black Wall Street, Durham's Hayti District, and Richmond's Jackson Ward. These self-sufficient Black economies provided jobs, generational wealth, and a sense of communal pride. However, integration led to the decline of Black-owned businesses as freedmen Black Americans sought acceptance in white-owned establishments. With newfound access to previously segregated spaces, many Black consumers abandoned Black businesses, leading to widespread closures. Meanwhile, Black entrepreneurs faced discrimination in securing loans and maintaining businesses in the face of economic integration, which ultimately favored white and non-Black businesses. Today, non-Black immigrant communities, including Arabs, Asians, and Hispanics, have capitalized on this economic shift, establishing businesses in historically Black neighborhoods. Instead of reinvesting in their own community, freedmen Black Americans spend a disproportionate amount of money in businesses owned by these groups, further eroding Black economic self-sufficiency. Prior to integration, Black Americans fostered a strong sense of unity, rooted in shared experiences, struggles, and aspirations. Black communities developed their own educational institutions, religious organizations, and social structures that upheld cultural pride and resilience. Integration, however, weakened these bonds as freedmen Black Americans were encouraged to assimilate into mainstream society. This shift led to the gradual loss of traditional values, practices, and the prioritization of Black interests. As new immigrant groups entered the economic and political landscape, freedmen Black Americans found themselves competing for resources and representation rather than standing united. The prioritization of multiculturalism over Black self-determination further diluted Black political power and economic influence. The arrival of new immigrant groups has had a profound impact on freedmen Black Americans' economic prospects. Many immigrants have been able to access government and private resources that were originally fought for by Black civil rights leaders. Programs intended to benefit the descendants of enslaved Black Americans have often been extended to all minority groups, diluting the intended impact on freedmen communities. Additionally, immigrant business owners often do not hire Black employees, further restricting economic opportunities. Many of these businesses extract wealth from Black neighborhoods without reinvesting in the community, leading to further economic stagnation. The competitive labor market has also seen Black Americans losing jobs to lower-wage immigrant workers, exacerbating economic struggles and unemployment rates within Black communities. They downplay Jim Crow as a temporary setback rather than a systemic effort to maintain racial hierarchy. The truth is, America was not built on freedom. It was built on conquest and white supremacy, a reality it has never fully abandoned. The backlash against so-called critical race theory is not about education. It is about control. From book bans to rewriting school curricula, efforts to suppress history are designed to keep people uninformed and unquestioning. White supremacy is ingrained in American institutions, home, school, religion, and politics. And those who fear history reveal their own guilt. They know that an honest telling of America's past would destroy the illusion of innocence. It happened when the world saw Black Wall Street burn. It happened when the brutality of Jim Crow was exposed. It happened when the Southern strategy was unmasked as a tool of racial control rather than democracy. The systems of oppression never disappeared. They evolved. Slave patrols became modern policing. Redlining became housing discrimination. The plantation became the prison. And through it all, America has attempted to erase its crimes. Native lands were stolen through laws. Black freedmen Americans were denied land and wealth-building opportunities. Immigration policies were designed to maintain a white majority. When Black communities thrived, they were targeted by mobs, by bombings, and by policies disguised as justice. It was not enough to take lives. They had to erase entire communities. Highways were built through black neighborhoods. COINTELPRO was used to assassinate black leaders. Confederate statues were erected not in 1865, but during the Civil Rights Movement as a message of intimidation. And still, they expect us to believe in their version of America, one where slavery was just an unfortunate chapter, where the Tuskegee experiment is a footnote, where mass incarceration is an accident. But the truth cannot be erased. The real fear is not history itself. It is the reckoning that comes when people realize they have been lied to. A generation that understands the depth of deception will not trust blindly. And when trust is broken, people begin to question everything. That is what America fears most. Not its past, but the consequences of its lies. And no matter how many books they ban, how many voices they silence, how many distortions they spread, the truth remains. It spreads like fire, igniting minds and demanding accountability. The real question is not whether America will face its past. The question is whether America can survive what it has done. The fight to suppress history is not just about the past, it's about controlling the future. Look at the policies still in place today. Voter suppression laws disproportionately target black communities, just as literacy tests and poll taxes once did. The school-to-prison pipeline funnels black children into a system designed to break them before they can build. Discriminatory banking practices, like higher interest rates for black borrowers, continue the legacy of redlining. These aren't relics of history, they are present-day realities. And when we fight back, they criminalize us. The same government that calls Martin Luther King Jr. a national hero today labeled him the most dangerous man in America when he was alive. The same system that praises the civil rights movement now has laws banning protests that challenge police violence. The same corporations that post Black History Month ads are the ones funding politicians who strip black voting rights. They want us to forget. They want us to believe that history is behind us. But it isn't. Because the forces that upheld slavery, segregation, and racial violence are still at work, just under different names. The past is not dead. It is still shaping the present. And until we confront that truth, history will continue to repeat. The solution to these systemic issues lies in a conscious effort to rebuild black economic independence, cultural unity, and family structure. Key strategies include: Black Americans must prioritize supporting black-owned businesses, spending within their own community, creating a sustainable economic cycle similar to those in other racial and ethnic groups. Initiatives such as group economics, cooperative economics, and black business directories can help redirect resources back into black communities. Freedmen, Black Americans have to get back to strengthening black families. The Black Family Unit has historically been a source of strength and resilience. Rebuilding strong familial structures through mentorship, education, and economic support can provide a foundation for generational wealth and stability. Also, teaching future generations on the importance of cultural identity, such as promoting Black history, traditions, and self-determination through community-based institutions, media, and social movements will help reinforce a sense of identity and pride. Last but not least, political and economic advocacy is a must. Freedmen, Black Americans must advocate for policies that specifically benefit their community, rather than broadly applied initiatives that dilute their impact. This includes pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic incentives tailored to descendants of enslaved Black Americans. So yeah, integration was intended to supposedly provide Black Americans with equal opportunities, but in many ways, it disrupted the economic and cultural self-sufficiency of freedmen, Black Americans. By prioritizing Black economic empowerment, cultural identity, and family unity, freedmen Black Americans can reclaim their lost progress and build a future of collective prosperity. The time has come to reinvest in our own communities and redefine success on our own terms. The civil rights movement is often hailed as a victory, a moment in history where America finally made good on its promises of equality. But for freedmen, descendants of enslaved Black Americans, it was anything but a victory. In many ways, the movement left us worse off, thanks to a combination of leadership betrayals, failed policies, and deceptive labels that diluted our struggle. One of the biggest failures of the movement was the emergence of black leaders who prioritized their own political and financial gain over the needs of the freedmen community. Many of these so-called leaders compromised with white institutions in exchange for personal access to wealth and political influence. They embraced superficial integration while ignoring the long-term economic and social impact on black communities. Rather than pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic self-sufficiency, they settled for token positions in white-dominated spaces, leaving the masses behind. Affirmative action was another policy that was supposed to uplift black Americans, but in practice, it disproportionately benefited white women and non-black immigrants. Instead of addressing the specific injustices faced by freedmen, these policies became a catch-all for any marginalized group, diluting the intended impact. White women became the largest beneficiaries, securing jobs and educational opportunities that should have gone to freedmen. Meanwhile, black immigrants, who had not suffered from American slavery and segregation, were lumped into the same category as freedmen, further pushing us to the margins. Perhaps the most damaging consequence of the civil rights movement was the introduction of minority and multicultural labels. These terms blurred the lines between the unique struggle of freedmen and the experiences of other racial and ethnic groups. Policies that were meant to address the oppression of freedmen were opened up to anyone who wasn't white, turning the fight for black justice into a general diversity initiative. Corporations, universities, and the government all embraced diversity as a way to appear progressive while avoiding direct investments in the freedmen community. The fight for reparations was diluted into broader social justice causes that often left black Americans without targeted benefits. The result? Our unemployment rates remain high, our wealth gap has barely improved, and the systemic barriers that were supposed to be dismantled still stand firm. One of the most urgent needs in the black community today is the presence of strong legal minds who can fight for true justice. We need more attorneys and strategists like Thurgood Marshall and Johnny Cochran, visionaries who understood that real power comes from mastering the legal system and using it to advance the interests of freedmen. We must establish think tanks that bring together legal experts, economists, and policy strategists to create a unified agenda for economic and legal justice. These groups must push for reparations, fair housing policies, and legal protections against discrimination that specifically target the issues facing freedmen. Without a dedicated legal and economic strategy, we will continue to see our demands ignored and our communities left behind. The battle is not just in the streets. It must be fought in the courts, in boardrooms, and in legislative chambers where real change is made. If we are to correct the failures of the civil rights movement, we must first acknowledge them. We must push back against the leaders who sell us out for personal gain. We must rebuild black economic power by supporting our own businesses and institutions. Most importantly, we must reject blanket policies that treat all minorities the same and demand reparations and policies specifically for freedmen black Americans. But this is deeper than economics, deeper than politics. This is divine judgment. America is under judgment, not by man, but by God himself. The same God who judged Egypt, who judged Babylon, who judged Rome, is now weighing America in the balance and finding her wanting. America has sown destruction, and now it reaps decline. It has sown arrogance, and now it reaps humiliation. It has sown lies, and now it reaps truth, truth that cannot be hidden anymore. America is a land built on blood, on the sweat and suffering of the people it has enslaved, displaced, and silenced. But tell that truth today, and they call it divisive. They call it unpatriotic. They want you to believe that history is just a collection of dates and figures, stripped of the brutality, the deception, the theft. They tell you the Trail of Tears was just relocation, that the Colfax Massacre, Wilmington Coup and Massacre, Rosewood Massacre, Atlanta Race Massacre, Ocoee Massacre, Tulsa Massacre, Harlem Race Massacres of 1943 and 1964 was just riots, and that Jim Crow was merely a setback. What they refuse to admit is that America was never a nation of freedom. It was a nation of conquest, built on white supremacy, and it has never stopped being one. And that is why they are so desperate to erase the past. You see, history, real history, has power. It reveals the truth of this nation, of what was done and what is still being done. They call it critical race theory today, but it's just the truth, and that's why they fight so hard to bury it. From school boards banning books, to politicians scrubbing slavery from textbooks, to social media platforms silencing voices that dare speak honestly about America's past. White supremacy is culturally ingrained into every aspect of white society, in the home, school, religion, and politics. But tell me, what does it say about a people who fear history? It says they know their hands are bloody, and they are terrified that their children will ask them why. Because the truth would destroy their illusion of innocence. The same way it did when the world saw Black Wall Street burn. The same way it did when Jim Crow's chains were exposed for what they were. The same way it did when the Southern strategy was revealed as a blueprint for racial control, not democracy. But America has always had a strategy. Slave patrols became the police. Redlining became modern real estate steering. The plantation became the prison. And now, they want to act like none of it happened. They want to rewrite history to keep future generations obedient, ignorant, docile. And yet, what they don't understand is that you cannot erase pain. You cannot erase memory. You cannot erase the reality of people who have suffered and endured. This nation made laws to steal land from Native people. The Homestead Act gave free land to whites while barring Black freedmen Americans from ownership. The Immigration Act of 1924 made sure America remained a white country, closing its doors to those it deemed unfit. And when we, Black freedmen Americans, dared to build wealth, dared to thrive, they sent mobs, they sent bombs, they sent laws disguised as justice to tear down Black freedmen Americans' communities. And it wasn't enough for them to unalive us. They had to erase us. They built highways through our neighborhoods, turning communities into ghettos. They passed California Proposition 14 to uphold segregation. They used COINTELPRO to assassinate Black leaders. They used the daughters of Confederates to put Confederate statues in our faces, not in 1865, but during the Civil Rights Movement, as a warning, as a message. And still, they want us to believe in their version of America, an America where slavery was a misunderstanding, where the Tuskegee experiment was a footnote, where mass incarceration is just an accident. No, sir. No, ma'am. White supremacy is in the bones of this country, in the schools, the churches, the homes, the politics. It is a disease, and they refuse to cure it. But there is something they should fear more than the truth being known. They should fear what happens when the next generation realizes they have been lied to. What happens when young people of all colors understand that history was stolen from them, that their textbooks were propaganda, that their teachers were ordered to deceive. A people who know they have been deceived do not trust, and a people who do not trust begin to question everything. That is what America fears most, not the past, but the reckoning it demands. And that reckoning is coming. No matter how many books they ban, no matter how many voices they silence, no matter how many lies they tell, truth is like a flame. It spreads. And once it touches the people, it cannot be extinguished. The question is not whether America will reckon with its past. The question is whether America will survive what it has done. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.